reservation. What was that?
We're recording.
So what you see there is a green blanket that outlines, pretty much outlines the county. I dare say that's the only county of in the state that if you go on Google Maps or up high enough in a satellite and look down, that the county outlines itself, and that's because it's almost solid forest. And if we zoom back out there, you can see Menominee County again outlined against the other land uses around it in the state. So Menominee County, it has the state's greatest trout stream density, 77.8 miles of trout stream per 100 square miles of land area. The next greatest density for any other county is 49 miles of stream per 100 square miles of land area. And so you can see that it is about 1.5 times, has 1.5 times the density of the next county in line. And then there are 3 or 4 counties that have densities in the 40s miles per stream of stream per 100 square miles. Well, so we're talking about forest here, and streams are products of the landscapes from which they flow. They're flowing here largely from forests. And to put this in evolutionary perspective, just think that for eons, streams have managed themselves. They're always changing, but always following natural processes and tending to take certain forms. And these forms matter to the fish and other organisms in the stream. So fish have adapted closely to those forms, to habitat created by flow of water and sediment interacting with plants and animals in the stream and around the stream. Natural cold water streams provide trout and trout fishing because trout are closely adapted to how those streams work, how they work, how the processes operate within those streams, the natural processes. Well, we've messed up a lot of those streams. And that's why we think about having stream restoration, is to restore what we humans have done to streams. But we should remember that many streams that we've destructed, if we leave them alone, will self-renew. And years ago, the great conservationist Alder Leopold pointed out that land health is the capacity for self-renewal. And that applies to human health as well, of course. By land, Alder Leopold was talking to farmers mainly in those days, in the mid-1900s. So he called it land. We call it ecosystems now. Yeah. Well, in this workshop, we try to deal with science largely. And we get more knowledge in science by having research. Research is most effective. I ran across this recently. I ran across this wisdom that research is most effective when it corrects outdated assumptions. And let me tell you about one big assumption in our field that had to be dealt with. This was on the West Coast of North America. The state and federal agencies out there had huge programs of removing log jams from streams because they assumed that massive log jams block adult salmon from upstream spawning habitat, block them from migrating. But in about 1980, a graduate student at Montana State University tested this. And he found that the logjam streams produce more salmon, that is more young salmon, salmon smolts outgoing to the ocean, than did those streams that did not have log jams. So those programs halted. And today we talk a lot about having wood in the streams, lots of wood, a mess of wood, as we will be hearing about. So I want to make the point that stream bank plant life matters more than anything else for trout stream habitat. And we have some evidence of that in this research done by snorkeling in a West Coast stream. It happens to be a West Coast stream, but here they were looking at trout and sculpins. The brownish mass that you see there is a log jam. It happens to be an artificial log jam put in because it was lacking the logs that it needed in the stream. But you see how the colored symbols are trout, the black ones are sculpins. And I won't go into the details, but it shows how during the daytime, they're in under that cover, and at night they come out to feed in the open more than they do during the day. And then in the lower left, there are other trout there, but they're all oriented to the stream bank, and the stream bank has overhanging vegetation. Unfortunately, it doesn't show in this fellow's diagram. So stream banks matter more than stream plants matter, stream bank plants, excuse me, matter more than anything else for trout habitat if there's enough base flow of proper quality. Base flow is the amount of water flowing in the stream when it's not containing runoff, overland, when it's not containing overland runoff. And here's a diagram of the amount of base flow that tends to exist in Wisconsin streams. The bluer the coloring on that map, the greater is base flow. And the warmer the color on that map, the more lacking that area is in base flow. And let's superimpose on that a map of the trout streams in Wisconsin. Look at how they coincide. Most trout streams are on the blue part, and that tells us that another way of saying this is that if a stream is not spring fed in Wisconsin, if it's not a spring creek, it's not a trout stream. Another matter, and this is a hypothesis, I would like to see somebody test it, and I think it would be easy to do. The narrower the stream, the greater is the riparian plant effect. The more effective are those stream bank plants. So here we are in the northern forest, two ecoregions dealing with the northern forest in Wisconsin, the northern lakes and forests ecoregion, and the central, the north central hardwood forest, and the red asterisk shows you where we are on the Menominee Reservation. This is a map of the vegetation in Wisconsin before Euro-American settlement. The dark green areas of two types represent the northern forest types, one being wet and the other being drier, most of it being drier. The orange are the pine forest, and the, I don't have a pointer here, but the stippled areas, if you can make that out up there and over here, are called pine barrens, sandy areas of the state. And then in the southern part of the state, the light green are the southern hardwood forests, and the yellowish areas are prairie and savanna. And this is important, that before the Native American populations were devastated by disease and slaughter, after they came in contact with the Euro Europeans, they intensively managed much of North America, namely the part that you see inside the dotted line. Ignore those other patterns on the map there, but inside that dashed line, the vegetation was pretty intensively managed. They did not have metal tools. They had no plows. They had no cows. They didn't have iron axes, but they had fire and they used it. So so that they kept the land open, or they kept the forest without undergrowth in many, many parts. And it was only after their populations were devastated that forests came up, and by the time the so-called settlers were moving west, they perceived eastern United States, including Wisconsin, as one massive forest of tall trees. And this is the way it was represented in a magazine in the mid-1800s. And the title of this picture is "The Pioneer of the Western Forest." By Western forest, they meant forest in Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and so on. Well, that pioneer looks mighty rich to me and well-dressed to be a pioneer, but that was the representation there. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my switcher here. But in Wisconsin, what was going on a little later, after 1850 or so, until about 1915, in the upper left, you see the trees had been harvested, and the logs were being flushed downstream, devastating the streams, by the way. And in the right-hand picture, you see a logged forest after it had been burned, as often happened. The slash burned and tore through the countryside. And then in the lower left, of course, grass came up and people were getting out there and starting farms. The contrivance you see in the middle is a stump puller. That was the big chore, was to pull the stumps. And here's what the first aquatic biologist in the state of Minnesota had to say about all this. I'm sorry, I can't see what's at the top there, but I'm going to read it to you. This fellow's name was Thaddeus Serber, and he was hired by Minnesota in 1917. Wisconsin did not hire a fishery biologist until 1935, and already Serber was writing this report in 1923, and he had surveyed streams and lakes in much of Minnesota. And here's what he said about the streams. Can you get rid of that stuff up there at the top again? I don't know what it is. Thanks. He said the removal of pine forests has almost invariably been followed by fires of great destructiveness, not only sweeping all shrubs, moss, and small trees, but often entering the swamps and partially or completely killing the timber therein. For example, the Great Hinckley Fire of 1894, and that was close to Wisconsin, it was on the Minnesota side. He said, and then years later, nearly 28 years later, much of the country, he says, is prairie-like, but the fire spared most swamps, and reforestation of uplands has been rapid. That's important, that these recovery of plants tends to be rapid. And we're seeing that in various ways more recently than he's talking about. So he's writing, now we find heavy growth of poplar and other hardwoods wherever the soil will permit it. This country is watered by many small spring-fed streams, and the borders of all are heavily clothed with brush or flow through natural meadows and swamps. The swamps lie so close to the stream feeders that now conditions have become again much as they probably were many years preceding the fire, and will probably remain this way as long as the swamps which feed the springs are left undrained. In this region, we see an example of what is to eventually transpire unless handling such matters is changed. And by handling such matters, he means unless people go out and drain them. And by the way, that happened in a lot of places. It goes on to say the streams of the reforested country previously mentioned as having recuperated since 1894 are now among the best trout streams in the state, for the dense cover along their courses tends to preserve natural conditions. And he was saying that these were the best streams, but in the areas that had agriculture in the south, the streams were really suffering. He goes on to say that similar conditions obtained in other parts of the state where cut over lands have reforested themselves. So notice what he was emphasizing, some things that he was emphasizing here. The borders of all are heavily clothed with brush or flow through natural meadows and swamps. The wetlands were important. And he said that the streams of the reforested country are now among the best streams in the state, and that dense cover along their courses tends to preserve natural conditions. So streams were recovering there, and people had fishing like this with scattered trees and a lot of brush along the streams, and it was apparently marvelous. Thurber had another remarkable set of statements in his report. He said, ruined streams are an inevitable result of our advance in agriculture and other pursuits connected with our advance in civilization, so that our responsibility to future generations leads us to look into the causes underlying this in a search for a remedy. And that's what we're doing here today. Then, and that is his emphasis with italics, he said, we can assist nature, but we cannot improve upon her methods. Let's keep that in mind. But what have we been doing in southern Wisconsin? We've had these Tonkatoy projects in which we are sloping the stream banks back, riprapping the banks, and installing things like so-called lunker structures often underneath that riprap. And what do we end up with then? Streams that at first look like this, with strangely rock hemming the stream in on both sides of it, for heaven's sakes. And on the current bearing banks with these artificial structures underneath. And what do we end up with? Is that restoration? No, it hasn't restored anything that was there before. So why should we be calling it restoration? And what do we wind up with? Tidy Creek. We could rename that stream. That's what we could call it. And see what's at the bottom. Well, the habitat there is synthetic habitat made by humans. And here's an example of one of those streams. Well, here the vegetation has grown up. It looks much better, but it's still got that same material hemming the stream in. And what happens when we get the floods that are happening these days, and that always have been happening? The previous picture was in July 2018. This is in October 2018, after 2 August rainstorm floods tore out the work that had been done there. Well, there are streams in that area, though, in which the vegetation is doing all the stream bank protection all by itself, providing all the cover in that stream. One of the state's fishery biologists provided these pictures for me of an afternoon when he went out and photographed that stream and fished in it. And look at the beautiful habitat. No artificial habitat whatsoever in that stream. It's a marvelous place in the same part of the state where we saw the previous pictures. And he had an afternoon of catching many brown trout that looked like that, some of them even larger. It was marvelous. But here we are now in the northern forests. Let's let's go up there and stay there. And here's what we see in the streams. This one here on the reservation. And you can see right there an abundance of evidence that the stream banks matter for trout stream habitat. And when the wood falls in, that's a product of those stream bank plants. But there are problems. And one of the big problems, and I hope we're going to hear about it several times today from people, at least in the last session or so, we're going to have people pointing to this problem, is the alder thicket vegetative community. Lots and lots of streams hemmed in with this bush, the tag alder or speckled alder. And that's quite a barrier to fishability. It also has, of course, effects on the fish, not only creating a fish refuge, which is advantageous to them, but maybe in some ways reducing even the productivity of the stream. We don't know about that, but some people assume it. Anyway, the alder thicket community, big issue up here in the North Woods. Here's what John Curtis, who wrote the Vegetation of Wisconsin book, had to say about it in 1959. That the community is dominated by tag alder that's 5 to 16 feet high, and that has 50 to 95% canopy coverage. It usually occurs along streams or other places having water movement through the soil. And it's a successional stage between sedge meadow and lowland forest or conifer swamp. But that successional stage is highly stable and may long persist unchanged. Where derived from forest burn, however, it's much more liable to be replaced by trees. I want you to look at the left-hand diagram up there. That is a diagram of an area in central Wisconsin before any European settlement occurred, showing vegetative types. And the only thing I want you to see is those black blobs up there. Those are alder swamps. So there they were before any disturbance by European settlement. Maybe they have been there for a long time. Maybe there are a natural feature that is in place in the upper Midwest that we just have to reckon with as a feature that stays there and is natural to be there for a long time. If you want to investigate matters of this tag alder, here's the reference to go to by Janet Fryer in 2011. It's on the web, and it's a marvelous review of all literature, all scientific literature about that species up until 2011, and then you can find references that go on beyond that. I recommend that you go to that if you want to deal with this problem. So today we should consider too, what are we striving toward? Maybe toward something called stage 0, and we're going to hear about that. Is that pristine forest? Is it old growth forest? Is it just mature forest? What is it that we should be striving toward? Or maybe we should be considering a new term that has come up in deliberations about these matters called land degradation neutrality. What might that be? Well, it might be just the idea of let's do less harm. It involves systems thinking. It involves consideration of connectivity. It involves nature-based solutions and something called regenerative economics. I don't know what that is yet, but I'd urge you to read this reference that I've listed at the bottom And maybe we can go on with that sort of thing in future workshops. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker. He is John Bates. John is the author of 10 books. In other words, he is a writer and a contributor to 7 other books, all of which focus on the natural history of the Northwoods. He's worked as a naturalist in Wisconsin's Northwoods for 32 years, leading to an array of trips and giving talks, all designed to help people further understand the remarkable diversity and beauty of nature. He has served on the board of trustees of the Wisconsin Nature Conservancy, the River Alliance of Wisconsin, and the Wisconsin Humanities Council, and he currently serves on the board of the Northwoods Land Trust. John has a master's degree in environmental sciences from UW Green Bay. He and his wife, fiber artist Mary Burns, live on the Manitowash River in Iron County, where they have raised 2 daughters. And I want at this point to show you the remarkable book by John Bates, Our Living Ancestors, the History and Ecology of Old Growth Forests in Wisconsin and Where to Find Them. And John is going to talk to us on that subject. Are you here, John? Hi. Come on up.